My name is Amani Washington, and I am 32 years old. I had just finished the most agonizing act of my life, burying my husband Marcus. He was my life, my hero, my everything. I drove back to the house we had built our life in, still wearing the black dress from the funeral, the exhaustion of grief having settled deep into my bones. The rain was relentless, washing the cold, November misery over the entire world, but the storm outside was nothing compared to the one waiting for me in my own driveway. I pulled into the drive and my breath seized in my throat. I didn't see welcome. I saw an ambush. My father-in-law, Jeremiah, a man who always looked at me like I was something sticky on his shoe, was standing on the porch. Beside him was my sister-in-law, Tamara, her mouth set in a thin, triumphant line. They weren't there to comfort me. They were there to conquer. I watched in sickening disbelief as Jeremiah used a screwdriver to pry off the brass plate of our lock. They were changing the locks to my house. The shock of it, coming just hours after I laid my husband to rest, was a raw, searing betrayal that dwarfed even the pain of my grief. Jeremiah finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine. They were as cold and lifeless as the November rain soaking my black funeral dress. He didn't offer sympathy. He didn't offer a hug. He offered an eviction. Property reverts to blood family now, he sneered, his voice low and utterly devoid of pity. Amani, your time here is over. Get your boxes and leave. The ground felt like it was dissolving beneath my feet. They had waited until I was at my absolute lowest, a fresh widow, emotionally shattered to launch their attack. They assumed my grief would make me weak, compliant, and unable to fight. They assumed I would crumble into tears and beg them for mercy. My entire life with Marcus was being reduced to wet cardboard boxes that Tamara was piling onto the lawn. She tossed my favorite silk scarf, a gift from Marcus, on our teepee, first anniversary, onto the muddy grass like a rag. Every item they threw out was a fresh shard of glass piercing my already shattered heart. The cruelty was intentional, surgical, designed to break me entirely. I stood there, soaking wet, trembling not from the cold, but from a new, terrifying emotion, rage. It started as a low, burning heat in my chest, a desperate defense mechanism against the overwhelming tidal wave of pain. They thought they were dealing with a simple grieving widow. They thought they could erase me, erase my marriage, and reclaim their blood legacy. I looked at the pile of my belongings, scattered, wet, worthless in their eyes. I looked at Jeremiah, his face smug with the certainty of his victory. The pain of the loss of Marcus was still there, but it was being channeled, sharpened by the urgency of this monstrous betrayal. I would not give them the satisfaction of my tears. I would not beg. I walked slowly toward the porch, the mud squishing under my black funeral pumps, the sound echoing the slow, painful beat of my heart. I stopped directly in front of Jeremiah, forcing him to look me in the eye. I could smell the stale scent of his expensive, outdated cologne, the smell of old money and entitlement. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke only loud enough for him to hear, and the words were laced with the pure, cold promise of destruction. You forgot one thing. If you have ever had to fight for what is rightfully yours against greed and betrayal, hit that like button and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. This is the story of how a grieving widow became a queen, and how I took back everything they tried to steal. They thought I was just the complication. They forgot I was Marcus's wife, and they never expected me to fight back. I stood in the mud, in the middle of my own driveway, watching my life being reduced to a sodden pile of boxes. The pain of my grief was being violently corrupted by the prime, sheer, vile greed of the people who should have been my support. I had just buried their son, and they were already staking their claim on his assets, assuming my tears meant defeat. Blood family only, Jeremiah repeated, his voice low and guttural, savoring the cruelty. Your marriage contract is severed by death, Amani. You have no legal claim to this property or the family company. Marcus and you were a short-term arrangement. Get your belongings and leave. You have 5 minutes before I call the police for trespassing. He looked at me with open, undisguised contempt. He expected me to shatter. He expected the traditional widow's breakdown, the hysterical pleading, the desperate bargaining. He and Tamara, my sister-in-law, were standing there like vultures, their eyes cold and calculating, waiting for the performance. Tamara even stepped forward, delivering the cruelest cut with a malicious smile. You know, Amani, you never really fit in. You didn't have the family name, the family history, or the family money. You were always just a placeholder until Marcus settled down with someone appropriate. Now that he's gone, the contract is void. Did you really think Marcus would leave the house to some Some outsider? The insults rained down, each word a venomous arrow aimed directly at the deepest wound, the pain of always feeling like an interloper in a family that never truly accepted me. But the pain, instead of breaking me, became a searing source of focus. Every lie they spoke, every cruel insinuation, reinforced the absolute necessity of their total destruction. I looked at Tamara, then at Jeremiah, letting the rain wash the funeral makeup off my face. I was soaked, I was grieving, but I was suddenly, terrifyingly calm. I reached into the breast pocket of my wet black dress and pulled out a clean, crisp card. It was my lawyer's contact information. My hands, usually unsteady with nerves, were perfectly still. I walked right up to Jeremiah, pushing, past the security of his physical space, forcing him to take a step back. "You forgot one thing, Jeremiah," I said, my voice barely a whisper, yet vibrating with an intensity that made his triumphant expression falter. "You forgot who Marcus married." I didn't need to beg. I didn't need to cry. I had something far more powerful than emotion. I had knowledge. I had Marcus's foresight. I had his plan. "You think Marcus left the property in your name? You think he was relying on your blood loyalty?" I delivered the words like sharp, pointed stones. "Marcus knew you, Jeremiah. He knew you would pull this stunt. He knew you would be standing on my porch, hours after his funeral, trying to steal his legacy." The shock in his eyes was priceless. He realized his script had gone wrong. The victim was supposed to be weeping, not challenging him with the quiet certainty of a strategic counterattack. I looked down at the boxes and then back at him. "You want to talk about blood family and contracts? Fine, let's talk contracts. Let's talk about the survivorship deed Marcus signed. Let's talk about his $10 million life insurance policy. And let's talk about the $4 million illegal loan you took out that is about to sink your precious family company." The words hit them like physical blows. Tamara froze, her malicious smile replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. Jeremiah's face went white, his eyes darting frantically. Realizing his greatest secret, his financial fragility, was now known to the widow he thought he could dismiss. The moment of their cruel ejection was now the moment of their exposure. The pain of my betrayal was instantly converted into the power of my vengeance. They had mistaken my grief for weakness. They were about to learn that my husband had not married a victim. He had married a strategist, and he had given me the weapon to destroy them all. I turned and walked away from the house, not toward defeat, but toward the nearest phone, my lawyer's number already burned into my mind. I was done grieving. Now, I was hunting. I turned my back on the cruelty and walked away, the squish of my soaked shoes in the mud a pathetic sound against the roar of the rain. I walked for blocks, my legs shaking not from grief, but from the white-hot, channeled rage that was finally giving me the strength to stand upright. They had delivered their ultimatum, and now it was my turn. I found a dry, sterile coffee shop and used a borrowed phone to make the only call that mattered. I didn't call the police. That was a short-term solution. I called my lawyer, Mr. Jameson, the same one who handled Marcus's estate planning, a man who possessed the cold, lethal logic of a legal sniper. I didn't waste time on tears or emotional pleas. My voice was flat, hard, and utterly professional, reciting the facts of my ambush. "Mr. Jameson, I have been forcibly evicted from my residence by Jeremiah and Tamara Washington. They are changing the locks and throwing my property onto the lawn. They claim the property and all assets revert to the blood family. This is hours after Marcus's funeral." Mr. Jameson's response was immediate and terrifyingly calm. "I am sending a car now. Amani, do not speak to them. Do not engage. You did exactly the right thing walking away. Their actions are illegal, regardless of the will, but we need to address the larger picture. Amani, you need to understand something about Marcus." I waited, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced he was about to tell me something devastating about Marcus's finances, something that would confirm my in-laws' cruel claims. I steeled myself for another dose of betrayal. "Marcus knew this would happen," Mr. Jameson stated. "He knew his father was consumed by greed and would use his death as a financial opportunity. Marcus was not reckless, Amani. He was protective. Weeks before his death, he came to my office and meticulously set up a shield for you. My husband, my love. Even in death, he was fighting for me." The sudden realization that his last conscious acts were to fortify my future broke through the wall of my pain, not with sadness, but with a fierce, protective gratitude. "Mr. Jameson continued, his voice heavy with the weight of the secret. First, Marcus set up a substantial, ironclad $10 million life insurance policy payable only to you, untouchable by his family or any company debt. He made sure you would never be financially dependent on them. $10 million. That was the price of their immediate, humiliating defeat. It was not enough for my vengeance, but it was the guarantee of my safety. Second, and most critically, Mr. Jameson said, his voice dropping in significance. Marcus was aware of the true, precarious state of Covington Acquisitions. He knew Jeremiah was overleveraged and had taken out massive, questionable loans. To protect the company's value, which, despite its problems, was substantial, and to ensure you were never at the mercy of his family's debt, Marcus executed a survivorship deed. I could barely breathe. What does that mean? It means, Amani, that as of 2 weeks ago, and legally recorded with the state, Marcus transferred 100% of his controlling interest and all shares in Covington Acquisitions directly to you. Jeremiah is the founder, but you are now the sole legal owner of the company. The sheer audacity of Marcus's foresight, the brilliant, silent vengeance he had prepared for me, was a wave of overwhelming emotion. The house was theirs, they claimed. Fine, but the company, the family legacy, the very source of Jeremiah's power and pride, was now mine. The man who scorned me, who called me an outsider, was now an employee of the widow he threw out in the rain. The pain of grief was momentarily eclipsed by the cold, devastating satisfaction of my new, terrifying power. Marcus hadn't just protected me. He had armed me with a weapon of total financial annihilation, ensuring that the blood family who craved his legacy would instead lose everything to the wife they deemed worthless. The fight was no longer a desperate plea for survival. It was a cold, calculated conquest. And I had all the power. The realization that Marcus had protected me, that he had foreseen his family's betrayal and given me the power to fight them, was a powerful, bitter source of strength. The pain of the loss was still a dull ache, but the anger at their cruelty was now focused and lethal. I was no longer just a widow. I was the unexpected armed CEO of their entire family legacy. Mr. Jameson's office was a sanctuary of cold, legal logic. I sat there, drying off, while he worked with rapid efficiency, confirming every detail of my new power. The $10 million life insurance policy was confirmed, making me instantly financially secure. More importantly, the survivorship deed for Covington Acquisitions was unassailable. I owned the company, the very heart of Jeremiah's pride, and power now belonged to the woman he had just tried to throw out on the street. Amani, this gives us immense leverage, Mr. Jameson said, his voice clipped and decisive. Jeremiah is currently operating under the belief that he is the CEO, but legally, he is just an employee now. We need to move on the company's financial status immediately before he realizes he's lost control and tries to loot the accounts. My breath caught. Loot the accounts? You think he would? He already has, Mr. Jameson corrected me grimly. Marcus was worried. That was the real reason for the survivorship deed. Covington Acquisitions is not the stable entity Jeremiah portrays. He took out an aggressive, highly questionable $4 million loan from a private equity firm several months ago. He used company assets as collateral, assets that are now tied to you. If he defaults, the company collapses, and the auditors will discover the fraud. The truth was worse than I thought. Jeremiah wasn't just trying to reclaim an asset. He was desperately trying to salvage a sinking ship and use Marcus's death to cover his own criminal negligence. He wanted to steal my home and my grief to fuel his financial desperation. The vile nature of their betrayal ratcheted up another notch. My husband's legacy, the very thing they claimed as blood right, was rotten with corruption. I felt a terrifying calm settle over me. The pain was gone, replaced by the calculating need for total justice. We don't call the police yet, I instructed, my voice clear and low. We use this leverage. Marcus gave me the company. I will use the company to destroy them. I want to freeze every single corporate account immediately. I want Jeremiah's corporate credit cards canceled. I want a new board meeting scheduled for first thing tomorrow morning, and I want him to be publicly dismissed as CEO. The thought of Jeremiah, the authoritarian patriarch, the man who scorned me, being unceremoniously fired by the woman he had deemed worthless, filled me with a deep, cold satisfaction. And the house, I added, the memory of my soaked boxes on the lawn spurring me on. I want a temporary restraining order filed now. He is attempting to evict the legal owner of the property, me. I want a sheriff's deputy and a process server at the house before the end of the day. They need to be served with the papers while they are still basking in their supposed victory. I want Jeremiah to know that the game is over, and that his new boss is the grieving widow he just tossed out. The plan was perfect. Marcus's love had given me the weapon, and their greed had given me the motive. I was going from grieving widow in a black dress to the unseen terrifying hand of justice, striking them where it hurt the most. Their power and their money, the pain of my betrayal, was about to become the pain of their complete, humiliating ruin. The day after my husband's funeral, I sat in Mr. Jameson's office, feeling the immense, terrifying power Marcus had bequeathed to me. The raw grief was still a presence, a cold hand squeezing my heart, but it was now overshadowed by the urgent, burning need for justice. I owned their company. I was the CEO, and I was about to use that power to freeze them out entirely. The time for subtlety is over, I instructed Mr. Jameson. Jeremiah and Tamara are currently operating under the assumption that they can simply liquidate assets and sell the house to cover their father's $4 million illegal loan. We must strike the company first. That is the source of their power, and the source of their shame. I looked at the corporate structure documents laid out on the mahogany desk. It was an ugly mess of shell companies and over-leveraged debt. Jeremiah, the supposedly brilliant businessman, was nothing more than a desperate gambler, betting his entire family's legacy on a reckless loan. I want immediate, total access to all corporate accounts, I stated, my voice cold and steady. As the new majority shareholder and legal owner, I demand an emergency board meeting. I don't care if Jeremiah is the founder. He is now subject to my will. I want him fired as CEO and chairman by the end of the day. I want him removed from the premises, escorted out by security, with all his corporate credit cards cut. The audacity of the move was intoxicating. The man who tried to physically remove me from my own home was about to be forcibly removed from the company he created, by the woman he considered a worthless outsider. The pain of my humiliation was now translating directly into his catastrophic loss of control. We must also confirm the status of the house, I continued, the memory of my sodden belongings on the lawn still burning in my mind. I want the strongest possible temporary restraining order filed against Jeremiah and Tamara. They are not allowed to sell, transfer, or even approach the residence. I want them to know that their eviction attempt failed, spectacularly, and that the house is legally under my protection. Mr. Jameson was already on the phone, his voice a low hum of legal power, executing the orders with rapid precision. He was transferring the $10 million life insurance payout into a separate, secure trust in my name, effectively walling me off from any attempt by the family to claim financial dependency. The money was the shield, and the company ownership was the sword. As the corporate hammer dropped, I felt the intense, burning pain of my loss sharpen into focus. Marcus had done all of this for me. He knew his family. He knew their greed. He had spent his final days ensuring that when they came for me, I would have the means not just to survive, but to utterly decimate them. This entire operation was a tribute to his protective love, a final act of vengeance against the toxic forces that would have consumed us both. I was no longer wearing the black dress of a widow. I was wearing the armor of a newly anointed CEO, a warrior fighting her dead husband's final battle. Jeremiah and Tamara would spend the rest of their afternoon discovering that their bank accounts were frozen, their credit was denied, and their legacy was owned by the woman they had scorned. The shock and terror they were about to feel would be the first true payment for their monstrous cruelty, and I would not stop until they had paid every single dime. The plan was in motion. The financial freeze on Covington Acquisitions was taking effect, and the invisible knife I held to Jeremiah's throat was already twisting. But the revenge needed to be public. It needed to be humiliating. It needed to be delivered right back to the scene of their crime, my front porch. I had spent the last 2 hours with Mr. Jameson detailing the cruelty, the eviction, the locks being changed, the claim of blood family only. My pain was the evidence, and my anger was the witness. Based on my testimony, Mr. Jameson immediately secured a temporary restraining order, TRO, against Jeremiah and Tamara. They were legally barred from the property and from contacting me, but a piece of paper wasn't enough. I wanted the state to deliver the message. I wanted the law to enforce my new status. I want the papers served at the house, I told Mr. Jameson, watching the rain still lash against the office window. I want a sheriff's deputy to accompany the process server. I want them to see the official power of the court, confirming that the grieving widow they mocked is now their legal sovereign. The idea of Jeremiah, the authoritarian patriarch who believed he was above the law, having to face a uniformed deputy on his own porch filled me with a cold, righteous fury. It was the perfect reversal of their initial ambush. Around 4 p.m., I drove with Mr. Jameson and my own private security detail men Marcus's insurance money had bought to a discreet location near the house. I stayed in the car, watching. I didn't need to be visible. My power was invisible, executed by the legal and financial hammer I now wielded. I watched the deputy's car pull up. I watched the process server, a severe woman with a stack of documents, walk up to the door. Jeremiah opened it, undoubtedly annoyed, expecting a delivery or a religious solicitor, but he stopped dead when he saw the uniform. I could see his reaction from my vantage point. His face, usually so controlled, dissolved into confusion and then pure, stark terror. The process server didn't speak. She simply handed him the stack of papers, the temporary restraining order, the notice of the federal lawsuit exposing his illegal loan, and the documents confirming the freezing of all corporate assets. And then, the final blow. The notice from Mr. Jameson's firm, formally stating that due to the survivorship deed, I, Amani Washington, was the new controlling owner of Covington Acquisitions, Incorporated. Jeremiah stumbled backward, clutching the papers like they were white-hot coals. He must have seen the corporate documents first, the ones confirming that the company he had spent 40 years building, the company he was desperately trying to save with fraud, was now legally owned by the woman he had just thrown out in the rain. I watched as Tamara rushed to the door, reading over his shoulder. Her initial malicious grin melted into a look of sheer, hysterical panic. The deputy stood there, a silent, official witness to their collapse. The sheriff's deputy spoke, his voice carrying just enough for me to imagine the devastating words. He was confirming the TRO, confirming that they were to cease all contact and all action against me, and confirming that the house they were standing in was legally under my protection. They were trapped. Their arrogance had led them right into the most humiliating public legal ambush imaginable. They had been trying to steal a fortune, and in the span of one day, they had lost their company, their home, and their freedom to even approach me. The pain of my widowhood was still raw, but the satisfaction of watching their utter, undeniable defeat at the hands of the law was a searing, glorious antidote. The payment had begun, and it was just the first installment. The sight of Jeremiah, the authoritarian patriarch, stumbling back on his own porch, his world collapsing under the weight of my court papers, was the first true moment of peace I had felt since Marcus died. He had thought the law was his tool. He had forgotten that money and a good lawyer make the law a devastating weapon. The temporary restraining order was a temporary victory, a shield that protected the house and me, but the real destruction was contained in the federal lawsuit and the corporate notices. The lawsuit wasn't just about harassment. It was about the $4 million illegal loan he took out, using the company as collateral. I had exposed his deepest secret, his financial criminality, to the entire legal system. Jeremiah, his face gray and slack, looked past the deputy and the process server. He looked right at my private security vehicle parked down the street, at the tinted windows where he knew I was watching. He knew I was the one pulling the strings. The man who had sneered at me and called me an outsider was now facing federal prison because I had exposed his fraud. Tamara, his partner in cruelty, was hysterical. She grabbed the corporate notice, the one stating that Amani Washington was the new sole owner of Covington Acquisitions. She shrieked, a high-pitched sound of utter, entitled panic. "This is illegal. This is a forgery. Dad, you have to call your lawyers. She can't own the company. It's our blood legacy." The deputy simply reiterated the terms of the TRO. They were to gather only personal items and vacate the property immediately. They were legally barred from the residence. Their eviction attempt on me had, in a breathtakingly rapid reversal, culminated in their own public, humiliating removal. My heart was still heavy with grief for Marcus, but the anger was a driving, necessary fire. They had not just attacked me, they had desecrated my husband's memory by trying to steal the legacy he died protecting. The pain of their betrayal was the foundation of the legal trap. They had walked right into it, blinded by their own avarice and their belief that I was too weak, too grief-stricken, too unimportant to fight back. They had mistaken my black funeral dress for a surrender flag. They finally retreated into the house, but only to face the inevitable. They knew the sheriff would be back if they didn't comply. I watched as they hauled out small bags, their expensive luggage now looking like pathetic bundles of shame. They didn't walk out with their heads high. They scuttled out, defeated and broken, watched by my security team and the silent, imposing presence of the deputy. I drove away from the house, leaving the sealed fortress behind me. The house was not my goal. It was merely a piece of the battlefield. The real prize, the ultimate vengeance, was the total destruction of Covington Acquisitions, the company they had loved more than their own son. They had lost their home and their financial stability. Now, I would take their identity and their history. They were about to learn that the widow they scorned had become the sole proprietor of their ruin. The pain of my loss was now the catalyst for their absolute, total collapse. The sight of Jeremiah and Tamara being publicly humbled on their own porch was a necessary balm to my wounded soul. But the true work of annihilation began the next morning. While they were scrambling to find a lawyer who would touch their toxic case, a case involving bank fraud, a $4 million illegal loan, and a federal restraining order, I was presiding over the emergency board meeting of Covington Acquisitions. I walked into the mahogany-paneled boardroom, the room where Marcus and I had once laughed about Jeremiah's cannigless, endless, self-important speeches. Today, the room was silent, tense, and entirely mine. The senior management team, all of whom had been loyal to Jeremiah for decades, looked at me with a mixture of confusion and open hostility. They saw the grieving widow, the outsider, the girl who was only married to the real owner. They didn't see the legal force that now owned every chair they were sitting in. I didn't sit in Jeremiah's accustomed seat at the head of the table. I stood. I was not there to conduct business as usual. I was there to execute a financial death sentence. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear and utterly devoid of warmth. "As you know, following the sudden passing of my husband, Marcus Washington, and pursuant to the fully executed survivorship deed, I am now the sole owner and controlling shareholder of Covington Acquisitions." The legal facts were unassailable. The hostile glares from the management team were nothing more than background noise to the storm of my anger. "The purpose of this emergency meeting is twofold," I continued, holding their gaze. "First, to terminate Jeremiah Washington as Chief Executive Officer and Chairman, effective immediately. He will be removed from the premises by my private security team, which is waiting outside. Second, to announce the immediate and complete liquidation and dismantling of this company." The announcement detonated in the room. Managers gasped. One man actually choked on his coffee. Their shock was total. They had expected a hostile takeover, perhaps, or a restructuring. They had not expected annihilation. "Liquidation?" One of them stammered, his voice filled with panic. "Mrs. Washington, you can't. The company is worth millions. It's Jeremiah's legacy." "Jeremiah's legacy," I countered, my voice sharp with contempt, "is debt and fraud. The accounts are frozen because of the $4 million illegal loan he secured using questionable collateral. This company is not a healthy business. It is a financial crime scene that is about to collapse and drag us all into federal court. I am not destroying his legacy. I am salvaging the value of my inheritance and protecting myself from his felonies." I slammed a folder onto the table, the folder containing the full, ugly details of Jeremiah's over-leveraged debt and his desperate, illegal maneuvers. "I will use the remaining assets to cover his debts and pay the required taxes. The company will cease to exist as of the end of the month. You will all receive severance packages, contingent upon your complete cooperation in the orderly transfer of assets." The rage and the pain of their initial betrayal, the sheer, cold-blooded attempt to steal everything, had channeled into this single, crushing act. I was not a woman to be pitied. I was a legal force to be feared. I had not just taken the company. I had used the company to destroy the very idea of the Covington legacy, ensuring that Jeremiah had nothing left to salvage, nothing left to claim as his own. The meeting was over in 15 minutes. I watched as Jeremiah's most loyal executives walked out, defeated and terrified. Then, I sat in his massive, high-backed leather chair, the seat of power he had guarded so fiercely. It was empty, waiting for me. I ran my hand over the smooth leather, feeling the satisfying chill of total control. The company was dead. The payment was being processed, and the widow was the executioner. The emergency board meeting was a clean, surgical strike, but it lacked the personal cruelty I craved. Firing the executives and announcing the liquidation of Covington Acquisitions was financial devastation, but Jeremiah and Tamara were not there to witness the internal collapse. Their final, humiliating surrender had to be delivered to their faces. I used my own private security team to locate them. They were hiding out in a dingy, cheap motel near the interstate, a pathetic lair for the architects of corporate fraud. They thought they were safe, trying to contact their lawyers and salvage some small shred of their pride. I didn't go. I sent Mr. Jameson and 2 security guards, armed with the final, absolute ultimatum. The terms were brutal, echoing the cruelty they had shown me in the rain. They were non-negotiable, and they were designed to punish their souls, not just their bank accounts. Jeremiah and Tamara were informed that the company, their blood legacy, was officially dead. I recounted to Mr. Jameson later, savoring the details of their collapse. The assets were already being sold off to cover the $4 million illegal loan, and they would receive no proceeds. Their attempt to steal my life had resulted in the total loss of their own. But the ultimatum was about the future. I had the power to prevent the federal charges for bank fraud and corporate negligence. I had the documents, I had the evidence, and I had the absolute cold intention of using it. I offered them a choice. Sign an affidavit, admitting to the attempts to defraud me and illegally evict me from my home, and they could walk away with zero assets but remain free, I explained. The alternative was an immediate call to the FBI, with a full deposition detailing every aspect of the $4 million fraud and the misuse of Marcus's name. The terror was profound. Jeremiah, the powerful, arrogant man who had tried to change my locks, was reduced to a desperate, shaking criminal, weighing 2 decades in federal prison against signing his full admission of guilt to his daughter-in-law. Tamara, the spiteful accomplice who threw my scarf in the mud, was screaming, begging Jeremiah to take the deal. She was selfish to the last, concerned only with saving her own skin from the immediate reality of a jail cell. Jeremiah tried to bargain. He offered to return the house. He offered to sign over his personal savings. He still thought money could buy his way out of shame. Mr. Jameson was clear, I stated. There is no more money to bargain with. The money is mine. The company is mine. You have 2 hours to sign the document admitting to the cruelty, the illegal eviction, and the attempted financial fraud, or the FBI gets the full case file. The waiting was the final, agonizing twist of the knife. I was sitting comfortably in a luxury hotel suite, having bought myself a sanctuary with Marcus's protective funds, while they were huddled in a cheap, musty motel room, signing away the last piece of their integrity. 2 hours later, the signed, notarized affidavit arrived. It was their full, absolute admission of guilt, a permanent record of their monstrous betrayal. It was the final, total surrender. The physical act of signing that document, admitting they were vile, greedy criminals, was the ultimate payment for the pain they had inflicted upon me on the day of my husband's funeral. Their souls were now as ruined as their finances. The signed affidavit, their full, pathetic admission of guilt, was the quiet finality of my immediate victory. They had lost their company, their home, and now their integrity, all because they refused to see me as anything more than a disposable accessory to their blood family. But my anger, the fire that Marcus's betrayal had lit, demanded a final, visible, public act of destruction. I had destroyed the company financially by selling off the assets to cover Jeremiah's $4 million illegal loan. But I needed to destroy the symbol of their power, the physical sign of Covington Acquisitions that stood proudly on top of their corporate headquarters. I made a phone call from my hotel suite, not to my lawyer, but to a commercial rigging company. I need a crane and a crew, a large one, I instructed, my voice flat and businesslike. I need them at the Covington Acquisitions building tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. sharp. The job is to remove the entire sign from the roof. I want it done slowly, visibly, and publicly. The next morning I drove to the Soderate headquarters, the gleaming glass monument to Jeremiah's ego. I parked in a discreet location and watched. The sky was clear, a cruel contrast to the rain on the day of my ambush. I didn't have to wait long. The enormous yellow crane arrived, its arm unfolding like a prehistoric predator. The crew secured the massive Covington Acquisitions sign with heavy cables. And then Jeremiah arrived. He must have heard rumors, or perhaps he just couldn't stay away from the scene of his own execution. He pulled up in his pathetic, old sedan, the one I hadn't seized, his face etched with desperation. He saw the crane, the cables, and the clear intent. He lunged out of his car and ran toward the building, screaming, but my private security team, who had been guarding the entrance to prevent any last-minute vandalism, intercepted him immediately. "You can't do this. That's my name. That's my company," he roared, shaking against the massive guard. I watched, silent in my car, as the man who, heaven espawn, had tried to destroy me was reduced to a public spectacle of despair. He looked up just as the crane operator engaged the motor. Slowly, agonizingly, the huge brass letters began to lift away from the roof. The C, the O, the V, each letter of their precious blood name was raised into the sky, swinging like a death knell before being lowered onto a flatbed truck. Jeremiah collapsed, falling to his knees on the pavement. He wasn't crying, he was broken. He was watching his entire life, his entire identity, being dismantled piece by piece by a crew I had paid for with the inheritance he tried to steal. The final letter to be removed was the N of Covington. As it swung downward, the flatbed truck pulled away, carrying the physical remnants of the legacy he had prioritized over his own son's wife. The company was gone. The house was gone. The name was gone. The destruction was total. It was complete. And it was exactly the measure of justice I needed to balance the scales of my pain. I drove away from the empty building, leaving Jeremiah kneeling alone on the sidewalk. My grief for Marcus would always be a part of me, but the anger was finally sated, replaced by the profound, chilling satisfaction of ultimate victory. The dust had settled, the crane had left, and the corporate headquarters of Covington Acquisitions was now a sterile, nameless building, a tomb for Jeremiah's ambition. My vengeance was complete, but I had one final, necessary act to perform. I walked back into the former boardroom, the room where I had coldly executed the company. The massive mahogany table was still there, but the air felt different. It was cleaner, purged of the rot of greed and entitlement. I walked straight to the head of the table, to the empty space where Jeremiah's massive, high-backed leather chair sat. This was the seat of power, the place he had occupied for 40 years, the place from which he had orchestrated his fraudulent schemes and planned the cruel ambush on my grief. I sat down. The chair was enormous, the leather supple and cold. It swallowed me whole, but I didn't feel small. I felt immense. I felt the weight of the $10 million life insurance policy and the unassailable ownership of the company's liquidated assets. I felt the sharp, satisfying victory of the survivorship deed. I was no longer the outsider, the disposable wife, the grieving widow. I was the architect of their ruin. I was the sole proprietor of the legacy my husband died protecting. I sat there for a long time, letting the silence of the empty boardroom wash over me. The initial, white-hot rush of anger was subsiding, replaced by a cold, quiet sense of responsibility. My vengeance was not just about destroying them. It was about building something clean and strong in the aftermath. I looked at the window, facing the Atlanta skyline, the city where they had tried to bury me. I picked up a framed photograph from the desk that Marcus had always kept there, a photo of us on our wedding day, laughing, utterly in love. He was smiling at me, a protective, knowing look in his eyes. "You knew," I whispered to his image, the pain of my loss mixing with a profound, final wave of gratitude. "You knew they would try to steal it all. You knew they would stand on my porch and tell me I was nothing. You didn't marry a victim, did you, my love? You married a logistician. You married a strategist." My voice broke slightly, the only outward sign of the immense trauma I had endured. My husband had given me the tools to withstand the worst cruelty imaginable, ensuring that the last word, the last dollar, the last piece of power, would always belong to me. I placed the photo back on the desk, facing me, facing the new seat of power. I was not just sitting in Jeremiah's chair. I was sitting in the ultimate truth of my marriage. He loved me enough to secure my safety and give me the sword to protect it. I swiveled the massive chair slowly, turning my back on the empty boardroom and facing the vast, unwritten future. The pain was still there. The loss of Marcus was permanent, but the humiliation was purged. I was safe, I was rich, and they were ruined. The work was done. The feeling of immense power, sitting in the CEO's chair, was exhilarating, but the emotional silence that followed was suffocating. I had won the battle, but the victory was cold, bought with the ultimate price: the loss of my husband and the destruction of the family he came from. Jeremiah and Tamara were gone, legally silenced, financially ruined, and physically humiliated. They were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the shame of their public collapse. I heard through Mr. Jameson's contacts that Jeremiah was trying to find minimum wage work, the formerly proud corporate CEO reduced to the most basic survival. Tamara was dependent on friends. Her social status evaporated with the demise of the family name. Their lives were a wasteland of their own making. But my vengeance, though complete, wasn't sweet. It was heavy. It was a constant reminder of the depth of the betrayal and the cruelty they had inflicted. The memories of their sneering faces, their contempt, and the sight of my belongings tossed onto the lawn were scars that the $10 million life insurance policy couldn't erase. I established the Marcus Washington Legacy Fund, not a company, but a genuine foundation dedicated to supporting military families and their spouses. Every dollar it spent was a repudiation of Jeremiah's greed and a validation of Marcus's sacrifice and foresight. It was a clean, pure purpose carved out of a rotten corporate shell, The pain of grief, which had been deferred and weaponized by my anger, finally returned. I was safe. I was wealthy. But I was terribly alone. The fortress Marcus built for me was vast, quiet, and echoing with the absence of his voice. I found myself wandering through the empty, sealed house, the one they tried to steal before it, sold, searching for the ghost of our life together. My anger had saved me from being a victim, but it couldn't save me from being a widow. The immense power I wielded, the ability to ruin lives with a single phone call, was a constant, chilling burden. I realized that my vengeance was an immediate necessity, a life-saving action, but it was not a sustainable emotional state. I had to actively choose peace over further engagement. Jeremiah tried to contact me multiple times. Pathetic, rambling emails filled with pleas and self-pity, never genuine remorse. He still didn't understand what he had done. He only understood what he had lost. I blocked him. I blocked Tamara. I severed the connection completely. The final act of control was not the removal of the sign, but the absolute, permanent silence I enforced upon them. I protected Marcus's legacy. I protected my future. And in doing so, I finally protected the timid, hurt woman they had tried to break. The pain of the past was over. The work of healing, now armed with peace and immense resources, was about to begin. I was free, but my freedom had been purchased with the total destruction of an entire family. And that truth was the ultimate, bitter cost. The crane was gone. The silence was immense. The destruction of Covington Acquisitions was absolute, and the forced financial ruin of Jeremiah and Tamara was complete. I had achieved the total victory Marcus had planned for me, but the most profound transformation was internal. The timid, grieving widow had been replaced by a strategist who now owned her peace. I look at my hands now. They don't shake with grief or fear. They are steady, resting on the desk in my new, secure office, an office I chose, in a building I own. The pain of my husband's death will always be the baseline of my existence, but the anger at his family has been purged. It was a necessary fire that burned away their toxic presence forever. They are ruined, but they are free to live their pathetic, debt-ridden lives, a freedom granted only by my mercy and the need to protect Marcus's name from federal charges. Jeremiah is a broken man, forced to confront the truth of his financial criminality and the loss of the only identity he ever valued. Tamara is simply erased, her life of entitlement vaporized by the debt and shame her father created. They are no longer a threat. They are merely a cautionary tale. I look at the framed photo of Marcus. He knew. He knew the moment his life ended, their cruelty would begin. He didn't leave me money to mourn. He left me a weapon to fight. The $10 million life insurance was my safety net. The survivorship deed was my sledgehammer. And the $4 million illegal loan was the perfect target. He didn't marry a woman who needed saving. He married a woman capable of enacting total vengeance. And he loved me enough to make sure I had the means. The pain of the ambush, the black dress, the cold rain, the sickening sight of my belongings tossed onto the lawn is now a permanent scar, but it is a scar of survival. It reminds me that I never broke. I didn't beg. I looked them in the eye and promised their ruin, and I delivered. My life is now devoted to the Marcus Washington Legacy Fund, ensuring that Marcus's name stands for integrity and protection, the very qualities his father lacked. I am the sole owner, the sole protector, and the sole beneficiary of a clean, powerful, and unassailable future. I chose to stop fighting, not out of fatigue, but out of absolute completion. I took back the house. I took back the company, and I took back the narrative. The woman they called an outsider, the disposable wife, now sits in the seat of power, controlling the fate of the entire fallen legacy. I am Amani Washington. I was ambushed at my weakest moment, but I was armed by my greatest love. I faced down a monstrous betrayal and won everything. My peace is hard-earned, fierce, and total. They thought they had erased me, but they only managed to erase themselves. And in the silence of their ruin, I finally, truly found my own voice and my own freedom.